You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 235 for March 23rd, 2022. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about pay transparency in CRM. So get out your keyboard and leave some comments on those job posts because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Got a lot of people on today, so I'm going to do this the fun way since it's California for most of them, including me now. But joining me today is Bill, Heather, and Andrew, all in California. You guys all say hi at the same time.
Hello.
Hi. We should do it in harmony.
I know, right? Wow, that's way more than I expected.
We need to work on our singing, I think.
Yeah,
That's true. That's true. And then we've got Doug over in Scotland. Doug, how's it going?
Wow, I feel a little outnumbered. I mean, geez, remember this podcast had people from all over, and now it's just the California CRM podcast.
Yeah. Well, we're pretty much going to talk about the reason why too, right?
Yeah, well, and living in an RV, I might be stuck here because I think gas in the town we're at is up to $7 a gallon. So, and that's kind of low from what I've seen. But
you guys, and you're gas getting that high.
Yeah.
Man, that's $7 a gallon is basically what I paid during the good times.
Oh my goodness.
Good times.
No, it's because they do it in liters.
Yeah.
We buy gas in liters, and it's four some liters to a gallon. And then when you do the conversion from pounds to dollars, so I mean the dollar is stronger now, so it's not as bad as it used. It used to be 170, and now it's 130. So I think I'm still paying about $7 at the moment.
But Doug, you can still pay it in pieces of 8 or farthings or something, right?
Or Viking horns and Viking coins.
Yeah. That must come in handy as an archaeologist, right?
Guys, man.
Yeah, we're supposed to be the most intelligent of all, and this is what we're thinking about Scotland. Jeez.
Pilfering sites for paper gas.
We have not got a monetary system yet. It's eggs. We trade everything in eggs and cows.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
Nice. Nice. Oh my God. All right. Well, as Doug prepares his burros for a trip to town, let's talk about the topic for the day. So we had some other ideas and things planned, but there's actually some stuff blowing up over on good old Facebook right now and the Archaeo Field Techs group. And essentially, it's the age-old question of pay transparency. And from what I understand, looking back through some of the comments over there, again, we're recording this in mid-March or so of 2022, is archaeologyfieldwork.com, one of the two biggest archaeology-specific job posting sites out there. The other one is, of course, Shovel Bums. They both started about the same time. And archaeologyfieldwork.com apparently just came out with a statement saying that they'll now require employers to list a pay range or something regarding pay on job postings. And that's the first time that I guess an archaeology specific one based out of this country has decided to do that. And a lot of people, though, use Shovel Bums. I don't know why Shovel Bums is more popular than Arc Fieldwork. They generally kind of tend to have the same job sometimes, and Arc Fieldwork is free for people to post on. So I'm not really sure what the deal is there. Maybe because of the word Shovel Bum, people gravitate to their, I know that's the first one I ever went to. So, but anyway, people are telling Joe Brandon, who is the owner and founder and maintainer of Shovel Bums, that he needs to do the same thing. And he came out pretty quickly and said, no, I'm not going to do that. It is the job of the masses, so to speak, to require that, indicating that don't take jobs that don't have a pay range if you don't like what the employer is doing, or call the employer and say, you need to post a pay range or I'm not taking this job, or, something like that. Basically, he's putting it on people to enforce a standard, and then employers will then, presumably come back and say, okay, now we're going to do all this. And that's where we're sitting at right now. A lot of people are taking him to task on Facebook saying, no, you're the gatekeeper. It's up to you. And that's basically what we are going to talk about right now. Bill.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say to that because, this is probably, I didn't have enough time to look through how many times on this podcast we've said again and again and again that if it doesn't have a pay rate on it, buyer beware. And so we've said this for many years that they really should be putting them on there. We've had other folks on the show who have also followed our lead and said that needs to be something that's disclosed. And, I work for the government, right? And for government jobs, they post the pay rate. And there's a huge reason why. In California, where many of us live, you got to know how much money you're going to make before you even spend the time applying to anything from, working the grounds at the local city park to, being dean of a university anthropology department. Like you need to know how much money they're going to give you before you even think about doing it, because in California, things are totally expensive, right? And so that's becoming the case everywhere across the country. And unfortunately, in cultural resources, even though we've been saying this for the last 7 or 8 years, it's perpetually a thing that continually comes up that, folks apply, they have great, credentials and everything, they get interviews and, they go through the whole motion, and then they find out that it's a totally low offer by nothing that they did wrong, nothing that the company specifically did wrong. They just didn't have the money to pay these higher wages. And then you've got to decide whether you're going to take it or not. And in the past, when there wasn't very many folks doing CRM and there was constantly, an oversupply of folks, this wasn't really a problem because the company could just, switch through all the different, resumes and applications, go through the interview process and everything, and just pick and choose whoever's going to work for those kind of wages. And, you just take what you get back in the day. But I mean, the government jobs, they have long since told you, pretty much in line 1 or somewhere, a whole section that shows you the pay range. And, that's one of the things I think a lot of people like is the, not just the stability of the government jobs, but that you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. It very clearly tells you what kind of degrees they're looking for. It very clearly tells you the kind of activities and things that they want in the applicant. And it also very clearly tells you how much it is. And then you get to look and see oh man, Hilo, Hawaii, and they're only going to pay $30,000. I don't know if I should really move from Colorado all the way there, right? In advance whether you should even try for that. So to me, it always has been a mystery on how come that's not just a normal practice, but hey, like I said, I'm just one of the government workers here.
Yeah.
So, it is kind of, I don't see why people can't post a pay range. I see why they don't. I also don't, I think there's just as much of a good point to say, well, then why don't you ask before you start your conversation? The first conversation that you should have if there's a posting is you contact them and say, what is the range? Before you go through the whole process of an interview, that's a fair question to ask. And anybody that holds that against you is ridiculous. Now, do you want, some of it, the process of getting a job and interviewing for a job is awkward, and especially awkward for people who are entering the job market. So it's really difficult. It feels weird for some reason in this country. And I don't think it's just this country, but people have a hard time asking about money, talking about money in all different types of environments, not just the job market, right? People don't share what they make for a living. Lots of people don't ask for raises. I mean, I just increased 2 employees that are as needed, by the way. So I do want to kind of preface this. I am the CRM ogre hirer, right? At this point. But I just increased 2 as needed employees that have never asked for a raise. And I'm I was waiting for them to ask, but this is not right. You should be paid more, right? So without asking or anything, I gave them a pay raise, a good one too. And I actually had people in my company say, "Why are you doing this?" They didn't ask. I said, "Well, because to me, it's the right thing to do. They're good workers. They always show up. I never have any trouble with them. They're deserve to earn more." So coming from that perspective, that's where I sit. But at the same time, what is the big deal about if you want the job, right? And it doesn't have a posting for for pay. And people have to understand, this is some people's world, is this Facebook and, this communication. But there's a lot of employers that are completely out of touch. They have no idea that this is kind of a big thing. So you're missing out by just not
problem.
Yeah, it is part of the problem. But you are being short-sighted if you're not willing to just call that number and say, hey, what's the pay range on this? Before you even start the conversation and interview.
Just from a workload perspective, though, I mean, if I'm going to post a job, I don't want 100 phone calls from people who don't want to work for me because they don't fit within the pay range. You know what I mean? Sure. So I'd rather just post that and eliminate those calls.
I agree, but I will tell you one reason. There's other reasons, but there are one reason. Because there's a lot of times that people are just posting, companies are just posting a job that would cover lots of different aspects. So you're saying, hey, we have a field job that we need to fill, a field crew, a field director, just regular crew. We have runs the gamut. So what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to post that it's going to run from $20 an hour to $50 an hour. How is that pay range even helpful? It's not. And so that's why sometimes you don't see some pay ranges. I think there are some times when people are trying to, there's always crummy people in every environment. But a lot of times it's because they're trying to get the big bang for the buck. Hey, they're looking at it as a project posting, not as a job posting, right? So if they were otherwise, they'd have to go and have a job posting for their field director, a job posting for their crew, a job posting for their crew supervisor, you have to have 5 different postings, and they just need to fill these spots immediately. So looking at it more on a project basis than they are on a specific job basis. And because of that, they think that's $20 to $50 pay range is not helpful to anyone, right? And then you have the knuckleheads who just came out of college who say, oh, well, 50 is top. That's what I should get. And I get those calls. People think I get those calls all the time. People are like, no, I'm not going to. No, you said top pay is $50. That's what I want. Even though their experience is not commensurate with what they're asking for.
Yeah. They'll learn the hard way.
They can work at Best Buy. I mean, I don't really know what else to say. And also having that pay scale that doesn't seem like it's super useful, $20 to $50 an hour. I mean, folks know that 20 is what they're going to give, because it's been a long time since I was applying to jobs in CRM and everything. But I just remember the pay thing was always just this crazy monkey business that after they said they really wanted you, then they would come in with something that's just, they're going to rip you off. Essentially, that was what I always remember. I always remember that being a thing, and I always remember, when I was on the hourly scale and I was trying to work project to project, I always remember that was a total shenanigan. And as someone who's honestly just trying to apply to a job, they find out this thing is like $13 an hour, and you're shaking your head like, I mean, I'm on unemployment, man. I'm trying to find some kind of a way to put gas in my car and pay my rent. And they're going to give me this job offer, and you're super desperate. And I totally know that's what's going on with companies. They've been doing it for 50 something years now.
Yeah, Bill, that was my exact same experience, with the term shenanigans for the pay. That is perfect. They would say, oh, it's going to be about this. I remember once being denied 91 cents an hour. I was supposed to be working for $11.91, and this was a long time ago. And I remember I only got $11 an hour because they said, oh, the 91 cents was actually only for people from Texas. What?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, everything is bigger in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So,
including paychecks.
Right. I have my feeling is from talking to my students and everyone who's currently in CRM, I don't think it's as bad as the bad old days. I'm not here to say it's good, but it does seem more smooth maybe than what we experienced.
From the other side, and Chris, you hire people too.
Yeah.
This idea, and this is I totally get the idea of thinking that the companies are trying to screw over the people that they're hiring. No, I do think there are some people, there's crummy people in every environment. But I know when I'm hiring, I want to give people what they want. I want them to have a career here. I want them to be happy. Retaining employees is a beneficial thing for a company, even as needed employees. It's beneficial. It costs too much money. We put a lot of investment into people, even as needed, in training them. I don't want to lose them. Retention of employees is important. And so I'm not looking at this as trying to screw you, but at the same time, there is also a profit margin. And as much as people think otherwise, the profit margin CRM is pretty low. It is pretty low. And we can go into that and why that is. But I think there's a lot of ignorance, and I don't mean in a bad sense. I mean the true ignorance and the true definition of the word. There's a lot of ignorance from the people trying to get a job in knowing why pay scales are the way they are.
Well, Heather, though, it's the ignorance comes from the lack of employers telling them why pay scales are where they're at and things like that. And then, there's just, it is a combination. That's for sure. I mean, there's a lot of people, myself included, when I was a field tech for sure, I'm like, I have no idea what's my pay is based around here. I mean, at least a part of it is the company, and every company does this, not just CRM companies, but every company on the planet will try to get people to work for as little as possible to increase their profit margins. That's the negotiation that you do, even if you're working at Walmart. You know what I mean? Like, the companies try to make money. That's what they do. They're a profitable company, and they're going to try to get that labor for the lowest price that they can, but still hopefully trying to be fair, right? And but then there's all kinds of really big problems with all this, and we're going to take it to break here in a second because I know everybody that wants to speak is going to have a lot to say. But I'll just take us out with this. As I was thinking about what you were saying, yes, there are things, the profit margin is really low in CRM, but again, like the Facebook post talking about the gatekeepers in the job postings, there's other gatekeepers too, and those gatekeepers are CRM employers, and those employers, when we bid on projects, we bid to try to win the project, and the bids get lower and lower and lower, and at some point you got to say enough is enough, because this is destroying my profit margin and my ability to pay my people at a good rate. And I'm just not going to take that job. Not all companies. You're right. No. Not all companies. Yeah. And with a lot of the work in California these days, it sounds like it's a buyer's market for getting projects right now. But the point is, there's a lot of steps in this chain that could be improved to bring up people's pay scales. And I do feel that some of the smaller companies out there, and I don't think these pay discussions are directed at the really big companies, but the smaller companies out there, they probably don't want to post their pay range because they themselves are embarrassed at it. They're like, listen, this is what I have to do to get any work, and this is what I have to pay you. And they just don't want to put that out there, and they'd rather somebody just called so it's not like public domain. So
I have a theory on that, but we'll wait.
I know. We'll wait. I know you guys have a lot to say to that. Doug's hand has been up for like 10 minutes, and we'll kick this back off on the other side of the break. Back in a minute. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Register of Professional Archaeologists and the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and check out the link in the show notes. Welcome back to episode 235 of the CR Mark podcast. And this is such a hot topic. We spent like the last 20 minutes not recording, talking about this and other things. So it's pretty contentious, and I'm hoping we get some good engagement and conversation off of this, because that is the whole point of these shows, is to get conversations started and keep them going. So Doug, we didn't give you a chance in the last half of the first segment to give your piece. You've been living in Scotland for the last 10 years, but done a lot of research over here. So what do you got to say?
Yeah, man, I have a couple of comments. One is commenting off of what Heather had said about like the range and stuff, because you're hiring for multiple positions. Mm-hmm. I mean, we see it over here. It's not quite as bad. It's like $20 to like $50 because wages are too damn compressed over in the UK.
Yeah. But
I've always seen that, and I know some of it is also just like archaeologists being cheap, because like if you have to pay for the job advert, instead of doing like, if you have like 3 or 4 positions, you do one advert and it saves you a couple £100, because I think currently most of the job adverts, it's 125 or something on Badger, something like that. I understand that whole being cheap and whatnot, but I was just gonna say, it's like you can even put in a note. Like if you're saying like, yeah, we have field work and we're hiring for multiple positions, like even just a little note saying like, because if you're using field work and shovel bums, you can basically write whatever you want, unless things have changed dramatically. I mean, it's always sort of been a bit hit or miss actually in terms of the quality of like information on any job post, because basically there's no template, and it's just like if you have like field work multiple positions, even just putting like the tiniest little note that says like field tech 20 to 22, crew chief 22 to like 26, something like that is, I think it's quite doable. And I understand like if you're doing something like Monster or Indeed or those big ones, they have it's a form and you don't have that sort of leeway. But even like in job descriptions, you could just put like a note there. I don't, unless Heather, maybe you do have a sort of reason beyond that, but I think it's a pretty simple solution to, if you're hiring for multiple positions, just a quick note saying what level each position is at.
I think you should. The last time I have posted pay ranges. I don't typically do the posting. It's usually, you put a link in there from your company, right? So, but my reason for saying what I said was not to say they shouldn't. It was to let people understand that it's not necessarily because people are trying to screw you. I think sometimes it is that, but a lot of times it's just because the employers just aren't realizing that is important. Again, this is something that's really a hot topic for people, and I'm saying this to my company all the time. I try to say, listen, I'm telling you, this is what's happening. And they just look at me like I'm crazy. And then, a year down the road, they're like, oh, Heather did tell us about this, and so people, the employers are being short-sighted. What I'm trying to encourage is that the employees, the candidates, not be short-sighted. And it's up to you. If you don't want to go after or even consider a job that doesn't have a pay range, fine. But don't assume it's because it's this ogre who's trying to keep you down. There are some people like that, but that should be sussed out pretty quickly by just asking what their pay range is. And so what I'm saying is that just don't limit the possibilities because you assume if the pay range isn't on there, it's because employers are trying to screw you. That's not always the case. It's because sometimes employers just don't realize that that's something they should do. And I know some people would say, okay, well, there's the argument. If all job posting sites were to require a pay range, then the employers would realize that that's something they have to include. And so there's an argument for that for sure. But I say in the interim, while people are looking for jobs, don't just count them out unless you can afford to do that. Don't just count those out because you think that it's, a company who's going to pay low. They might be paying very well. And they just didn't realize that they should be putting a range.
I have a follow-up question for Heather, the ogre CRM person. So Heather, the ogre.
Yes.
I'm curious about, this may have come up earlier and I might have just missed it, but is it also sometimes that CRM companies don't want to post the pay because other CRM companies will see it? And it's like, if I'm posting 20 to 22, the other guys will see it and they'll say, well, we're posting 21 to 23.
You know what? I never thought of it that way. But again, I'm not in the hire. I mean, yes, I hire people, but like I have a larger company. We have an HR. We have a talent acquisitionist, whatever. That's the new title now. Right. A talent acquisitionist that kind of filters through their stuff, and they're the ones usually that post. So maybe I don't know if it's really. I think it's a really good point. Maybe some are thinking that we're known for paying higher than most,
right?
And so paying more to me is a good way of retaining people long term.
Yes.
So obviously that's, let's say, given, right? But I could see that might be for some people, that might be a consideration for sure.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to, so my sort of follow on, which I think ties in really well with Heather, is I think actually a lot of people don't give this any sort of thought. Like, I'm pretty sure the vast majority of people who have posted jobs for CRM jobs have just posted what they've seen, which is what someone else had seen like 10 years before, which people had seen 20 years before. Like, I don't think actually many people give a lot of detailed thought. And so like we have picked up a lot of bad habits that that's how everyone, it's one of those things where like, it's the way you were taught, and that's right. How it goes. In the UK, generally job postings for archaeology, so like Badger requires, what the pay is, except when he doesn't. And that's because like, so, big engineering, multinational, 30,000 employees around the world, the big engineering firms, they'll have an HR policy that says we don't post job ranges. And then there is no way that the archaeologist who might have a team of like, 20 people who are probably some of the lowest paid people in the entire organization is going to be able to convince HR that they can do it. And so some of it, like, some of it, we're assuming that like, all CRM people have like some sort of agency here. Some of those bigger companies, it's policy and that's it. Like there's no, you have no power to change that policy. So I think you kind of do have to look at who's posting. So if it's like I don't want to call out any names, but if you're seeing a company that's a fairly large, multi-international, thousands of employees, whatever, and they're not posting jobs, that's probably company policy. And it's not like they don't want to, because usually they can pay much better, and they usually do pay much better because they'll be sort of on the consulting side or something like that. And because also like those companies will have set pay ranges, and they'll laugh at when they see like the going rates of archaeologists, and they're like, well, our lowest rates don't even cover that. That's like intern pay. And so like, it's one of those things. So I think you have to kind of look at who's posting. And I guess in semi-defense of like Arjo and also like in defense of like David over in the UK, is like, that's their business. Like when he was basically saying he's not going to force employers to, pay ranges, that's because like, that's his job. That's been his day job for maybe 15. I can't remember when he stopped doing like
actual
field
CRM
work. Yeah, but it's been at least like, I don't know, a decade plus, maybe 2 decades. I think it's been quite a long time. And that's at least 15 years. I think 2005-ish, maybe 2006, 7.
Yeah,
he started basically doing that. And it's the same thing with David. So David does a step further, and he won't post jobs below a certain threshold. And that pisses off some employers. And so it's a huge negotiation each year between him and employers on like what his minimum is going to be, because he can't push. And he used to have like minimums for all sorts of levels, and now it's just like the bare minimum for your field tech level. And it's a hard thing. He pushes too hard against employers. He doesn't. That's okay. I'm not gonna say it's his main income, so I don't want to like out David's stuff, but it's a significant income. I'm pretty sure for Arjo, he's not making any that much money off of his t-shirts or anything like that. So I kind of understand where it's going, like, why those people who run the job boards are not as keen, because some employers have said they're not as keen. And I'm pretty sure this just comes back to a lot of people are doing what they've always done. And probably a lot of people have fears that they haven't talked out, that may not actually be real fears. So like when you guys were talking, Andrew, when you were mentioning like, some people don't post because, they don't want to be undercut or overcut, but actually, as if you thought about it logically, you would want to know exactly what the going rate is. And I know this is going to be a double-edged sword that people aren't quite thinking about there. Everyone's thinking like, if everyone posts, wages will go up. That's not necessarily true. Exactly. What's going to happen is we're going to hit a recession. True. And what's going to happen is someone's going to post, okay, let's say the going rate, hypothetical, $20 an hour across the U.S. everywhere. It's $20. And then what's going to happen? Someone's going to post for like $19.50, and then someone's going to post for $17. And if they can post that low and still get staff, wages are going to go down. So like,
Yep.
I'm all for it, but I think people need to realize that like more information isn't always your friend.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like, because I've compiled job rates, going rates from the job boards of Shovel Bums and Archeo Field Work. And to be honest, actually at the lower level, like pretty much, I'd have to go back and look, but probably like 80% of field tech and crew chief jobs have wages in them. I mean, it's been a couple of years since I've done that, but that's been pretty much true. It's once you get to like project manager or PI that almost no one ever posts anything ever.
Right.
So I think, everyone's talking about like field tech. Those are pretty, I mean, we have pretty good, and everyone kind of knows what the going rates are. And honestly, going back to like having done jobs where you get like, during recession, when you have 100,
Doug,
100
pause.
applications, man. Yeah.
Do we have like 100 things to comment on so far? You can't just keep going.
Give me a second. I'm wrapping it up. All I'm going to say
we're not going to get to it all.
No. Well, you got time. All I was going to say is basically like having done a job posting where like 100 people apply, like it is a huge waste of time if like 50 of those people call me and ask what a job, what the pay is.
Yes.
Or also like I go through the entire interview thing. I mean, it's a pretty big risk for employers. Like you go through the, it depends. Sometimes it's, employers market, sometimes it's employees. And like if you go through that whole process, maybe you interview like 3 or 4 people and like you go to offer the job and they're like, no, the pay's too low. You've just spent all that time. Maybe you go to your second choice, or maybe like everyone turns you down and you have to do that whole process again. Mm-hmm. So I think people don't, like on the employer side, sometimes I think people haven't actually thought through what goes into, actually posting a job, and actually critically thought about like, is this even costing you more time by not putting up wages, or not putting up wages, but putting out your wages or your range, your pay range. All right, I'll stop now so you guys can all comment. You California Mafia.
I don't even know what to comment on at this point. I will ask a question, though, because I'm curious as to what's happening with Badger. Now, when you were talking about David, for those of you that don't know, that's David Connolly, who runs the British Archaeological Jobs and Resources page, which is Badger, which is like the Shovel Bums, Arc Fieldwork equivalent over there. He's just doing so many cool things with the whole Badger setup. But my question is, I want to know, Doug, do you know where else? Because if they're not reaching his thresholds, like an employer for posting, where else are they posting? And I'm asking that because a lot of people, and I don't think it's enough that it's taking business away from Arjo, but not too much anyway. But a lot of people are just posting on Facebook these days. And that, I think, you guys are talking about inflation and if people start doing this and that. But you know what? They're just going to say, screw everybody. I'm posting this on Facebook because there's literally no regulation. And then it's going to fall on people like me, who's an admin of Archeo Field Techs. We're going to get taken to task. And they're going to say, take these job postings down because they've suck. Already tried. And they've already tried. And we've already said collectively, the admins, no, we're not going to do that. You guys take them down in the comments.
Right.
But real quick, where Doug are they posting? Because I don't see British jobs being posted in Archeo Field Techs. It's mostly Californians in there. Where and the Badger Facebook page, I assume David would just take those down for the Badger Facebook page. So is there a British archaeological field techs or CRM type page that none of us know about where people are, posting these jobs outside of Badger?
Yeah, so one CIFA, which is the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, which is like the British equivalent of RPA, they have a jobs board, which, oh gosh, they keep changing the name. It was like Jobs Information Service and something, and now it's something else. But that's like a weekly email that goes around, and they also have, it goes up on their website. So those are the two main job boards. A lot of other people over the years have tried to start their own, but honestly, like a lot of employers, if they can't meet the threshold, they just go on someplace like, so Indeed. Does that do you guys have Indeed in the States?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's other job posting stuff that actually some companies are just fine doing, or it's a bit complicated, but and you get this in some parts of the States where there's only so much work in sort of small rural areas. And you basically you're not going to have, those companies that work there are not going to get like the pipeline deals, because that goes to someone who's working across like the country or big things like that. So they have like small work, and they basically have the same one or two people that have worked for them for forever that they work on. So, it's a mix. Like some people just have sort of a personal rotation of local people that they always work with, and that's who they go to. And they don't really ever need to post for jobs. They can just work with the employees they have. And others, Indeed, or honestly, the limit on Badger is so low that most people make it or pay above it anyways, that it's only a small number that don't post there. So there's always other places people can go to post.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. All right. Hey, guys, we need to take a break, and then we will come back on the other side. And I usually say wrap up this discussion, but there's no way we're going to wrap it up. We're just going to keep talking about it for another 20 minutes and then end the show. So we'll be back on the other side. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the third and final segment of the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 235. And we're talking about pay transparency as a result of discussions being had over in the Archeo Field Techs group on Facebook. And I want to kick off this segment just by mentioning a couple things. First off, the Archeo Field Techs group on Facebook, people talk about, in fact, Bill was telling us this before we even started recording. And by the way, Bill is not just being quiet. He had a meeting to go to, so could only do segment one. I should have mentioned that last time. We didn't just shut him up and keep him muted. But as much as, no, I'm just kidding. Anyway, he was mentioning, and other people feel this way too. I'm just saying that because he was specifically brought it up, but talking about keyboard warriors and nobody's willing to say anything to anybody's face anymore. It's all Facebook. But to be honest, in 2022, this is the place where people have a voice and they feel like they're saying things. And I want to say too, I mean, your name and everything is right there. And I have had people unfriend me. I've unfriended other people because they're toxic. We've kicked people out of the Archeo Field Techs group because of their inability to speak civilly to others. Mm-hmm. I think your behavior over in that really popular group that has a lot of field techs in it and a lot of employers in it.
And a lot of employers. That's what I was
And a lot of employers. Yeah. And I think that's having a real impact, positive and negative on people's actual work. So, And then the one thing I wanted to mention, because I'll have the link for this in the show notes, something I just heard about this morning, as a matter of fact, before we even started talking about this topic. March 15th, tomorrow, as we're recording this, is what's called Equal Pay Day, something I had never heard of before. And apparently the U.S. Census Bureau comes out with this every year. That date that they decide on what that date is going to be is the date at which the median pay for women reaches what men made last year. So an extra 2.5 months of working to make what men made last year, because I think it's currently, like, when you look at average pay scales, it's like 83% women make for the same job that a man is doing. And I think, that is shocking to me, first off. I mean, it's not shocking that women are getting paid less. That's been a problem we've been dealing with for a long time. And I'd love to see the history of this day. Is it moving closer to January? Like, I hope so. Right. And you can actually see it for different countries. Germany's Equal Pay Day was March 7th. I actually would have thought that was a little bit closer, being over in Europe, but I don't really know. But it's shocking. And I think because of that kind of thing, until we are all getting equal pay, I think pay transparency is incredibly important for those reasons. You need to know what other people are making, and not only what they're making, but why they're making what they're making. So you can say, okay, so if I want to be at that level, Mr. or Mrs. Employer, what do I actually have to do to get to that level? Do I need more experience? Do I need more training? Do I have to do this? Do I have to do that? Like, what gets me there to what that person is doing? That's how I see pay scales. So
I have
Heather,
something to say about that.
I'm sure you do. Let's hear it.
Okay. Well, first of all, one thing I'd like to say, because I wanted to say it earlier, is that shovel bums, for whatever you feel about shovel bums or this guy's, response, I have to admit, transparency. I've never been on shovel bums before. I know that's kind of weird until this morning, and I never had to. I've been lucky enough that I never had to. So, but shovel bums, people need to read his website, because he's not against posting wages. He puts it on his website. Please, please, please post your wages. Okay,
Request
so he's not. He requests it. And so there's a difference there. And I think people need, before they start witch hunting, I think people really do need to look at the whole picture. That's about in general. People need to do that. But anyway, so that's all I'll say about that.
No, I would just agree with you real quickly, Heather, and just say like all that like silly, this is where that online Facebook world goes off and is horrible, like this cyberbullying BS, you know, like, oh, since you're not posting it, you're the bad guy. It's like, whatever. That drives me nuts.
Yeah. And don't demonize, you know, you can disagree with somebody without saying that they're the worst person in the world. I mean, Come on, like so immature. And like Chris was saying, employers are watching this. There are employers that are watching your comments. And it's not about, you know, you say something as an employee or a potential employee that I don't agree with, therefore I'm not going to hire you. No. But if you say something in an immature and a toxic manner, do I want that in my workplace? No, I have a responsibility to the other people. If you're going to act like that on social media, what are you going to do in the workplace? I don't want that in the workplace. Okay. So, you know, people need to think about that. Okay. Aside from that.
Heather, real quick on that, as an employer and somebody that looks at these things, you said that you guys have a talent acquisition person, which I don't know how talented they are because I never got a phone call. Neither did Andrew, but whatever. So, but anyway, at what point when they come to you, when you're making a decision, you're handed some CVs and you're like, okay, you know, how much vetting has been done there? And then I'm wondering how much vetting you do. Does anybody at your company, including you, actually go to Facebook and search for these people? Because you can search within a group, even if you're not friends with somebody, and see all the posts somebody has made within that group. And I just want to know if you're actively doing that.
You mean on social media?
On social media, yeah.
Okay. I don't. So first of all, as talent acquisitionist, for archaeology, I personally like to find people myself. Now, they're the ones that will go through our whatever posting algorithm server that we have, and they'll shoot me resumes for all levels. And I'll go through, and I also have managing status on that site where I can go in there and look at everybody myself, but I don't have all that time. So a lot of times they'll just weed out the ones that are, you know, baristas that don't have an education and have never done archaeology, and they're just looking for any job at all. Right. So they're the ones that will kind of weed those out. And then they'll send the rest of the resumes to me. And then I used to make all the phone calls. I can't do that anymore. And so I reach out to one of my colleagues and I have them call and weed people out and see, are they still interested? What are they looking for? That kind of thing. Then it gets to a certain point to where I actually interview them. And it depends on what level of job it is. If it's a as needed job, I will call them. It'll probably take 20 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes, and sometimes longer if they have more questions. But for me, I have a set questions that I have. And if they fulfill these things, boom, that's it. Let's get them signed up. We're ready to go. Now, it may last longer if they have questions. I'm always willing to stay on the phone. I've stayed on the phone for an hour with them if they have questions, and I'm happy to do that. So I vet everybody, and people disagree with me in my company. No, you know, that's why we hire these people. Well, no, they're not archaeologists. They don't know. And before I have somebody go out on a field, I want to get a sense of where they're at. And a resume, a lot of times, does not give me that information. And there are some times where I think, you know, especially new people coming out of college, they don't understand what to put on their resume. And so I would rather give them a chance and talk to them and see where they're at. So I do almost all the vetting, me and my team.
Okay.
And I think for archaeology, I mean, if you're in a larger, medium-sized company, we have about 800, 900 people in our company. Yeah. You need to start doing that yourself, because it's just, they're not going to be able to do it for you. And I really believe that we need to have qualified people out there. We shouldn't just be putting anyone out there. So yeah, I think as far as, you know, the female, there's so many other aspects. There's been a lot of really great articles written about the equity of women's wages. And there's a lot of reasons why that number is lower. I do think generally it is lower, but I do think it's not as low as people say it is. So the difference between male and female. So that could be a whole other podcast.
Depends on industries too, right? Because that's the median pay scale across like all jobs everywhere that's reported on. So,
and that's why people need to realize that. Yeah.
In certain industries, it might actually be closer.
Better.
So,
or even higher for women.
Or even higher. Yeah.
Yeah. So Bill had brought up state and federal wages. those are, and using them as an example that they post everything and that's great and people know where they stand. Well, that's fine. You know where you stand with crappy wages. Honestly, federal and state wages are some of the worst in archaeology. So
yes.
why? I mean, at least it's crappy. Oh, is that a good thing? That's a good thing to know you're in a crappy position. I mean,
the answer is sort of. It's sort of, and actually, this whole talk that we've been having in terms of really, wages and are they clear to others or not, and the whole shovel bums thing. I would say I've had some experiences just with my students and talking with them. And in terms of like on the ground level, I've noticed that as a younger generation, right, we're talking people in their early 20s, I've found that they're much better than the older generations in terms of being open with how much money they make. Like they'll tell each other, they'll really look for this kind of thing with others. They really work it out. They don't have that same amount of like social pressure not to tell, which is really great. So they talk between each other. They talk about how much money, they are making because of the hiring as it is. Currently, like a lot of them are really getting poached from my classes. It's crazy. I've never seen this before, where the hiring is so much in need that these guys are getting jobs literally even before they kind of finish everything. And I will say what Heather just brought up in terms of state government. One of my students was currently working in was looking at a job sort of in the state world. And it's true. The money was so low that he's seriously considering just straight up not taking it because, it's in an area of Southern California that's very ritzy and expensive, and it just doesn't go with living, so this is something that these young people are looking at. And it's really interesting to watch them go through the process.
It was just a comment on the gender wage stuff. It's not it's not really about wage discrimination, which is fairly rare. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen where, say, for the same experience, a woman will get paid less as a man. What it really comes down to, and this is why you have it in places like Germany and the UK is pretty bad as well, is that we sort of have an obsession, I would say we as like everyone, with like equating years worked with pay. Yeah. And so, women, unfortunately, usually get you have a lot more holding back your career. So if you have a kid, depends what country you're in, that's several months out for childcare, and you can't do overtime or all this other stuff. So it's more about when you start to add up all the wages, women will earn less, but that's because, we have this obsession with paying people by time served as opposed to their abilities, where I think, if we did more to pay people by their abilities, I would imagine you would have less, because things like having a kid would have less impact on you. In fact, I don't know, I'd say probably women would be better at juggling multiple tasks because they have to do work and family. Right. And so would probably end up being paid more if we weren't so obsessed.
Well, and exactly to that point, that's one of the things that people need to look at and be a little bit questioning of this idea that women make so much less. That's a really good point. And what entity actually does consider time worked and have an obsession with time work? Federal and state jobs. Because everything, they've gotten to the point where they're like, you know what? If we have to have a concrete, these are these things, the list of things that you have to meet in order to make this range, okay, then it has to be concrete or people are going to start suing us, right? You have to have a quantitative way of determining somebody's pay scale. Now, in the private sector, and a lot of people are not going to agree with it because they haven't been there, and you don't know until you have that perspective. But, a lot of what people make should be in how successful they are in making the company money. And the risk that you're willing to take and the effort you're willing to make, and even though you work for someone else, the entrepreneurial approach that you have to your work. I'm lucky I work for a company that basically kind of run my own business in my region, and I work my butt off to bring work in, and nobody's going to be able to understand that. So they're going to look at and they're going to say, oh, well, I worked this long. And a lot of people, I see that on these boards. I work this much. I have this experience. I can do this and this and this. Instead of, you can't just mail it in. You can't just say, oh, I have these set of skills that are like quantitative skills. There are some skills that are intangibles, and those are the skills that bring money into the company. And if you're bringing more money into a company because you're working hard, you should make more money, period. And you know what? That's hard to put down on paper. And when you have that's why you have Transparent California, which is a website where you can look up anybody who works for the government, for the state of California, what they make for a living. And you pretty, I just think that people need to look at that. It would be hard. There's one guy that works in our company and makes a lot of money. And you know what? He's worth every penny because he brings millions and millions of dollars into our company. So, people need to think about that. You're not just, honestly, it's just shocking to me. Some of the people that called looking for work that want to come straight out of college, and they think that they should be making $28, $30 an hour.
Whatever, Heather, spoken like the ogre, there's the ogre again.
And you know what? That's fine. You come out of college. Well, I have a certain lifestyle I want to live. Well, that we all want to live. We all want to live a certain kind of lifestyle, but you also have to be, reasonable, understand what your skill set is. I could have no education, and I could have only be able to flip hamburgers for a living. Nothing wrong with that, and I could say, well, I want $30 an hour because I have a lifestyle that I want to keep up. I mean,
right. No, exactly. No, I totally agree. But I will say sometimes Transparent California, like I'm on there and it looks like I make more than I do sometimes.
That's because of benefits.
Yeah, I know. But sometimes like really, but that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah. I would just add smart metrics as well. Like, unfortunately, too many companies also just look at, they bring in this amount of money, but also they're working like 80 hours a week or 100 hours a week.
I work 80.
Yeah. But honestly, like they should be looking at metrics of like, can someone for 20 hours bring in just as much money as someone who's working 40 hours or, stuff like that? Because if not, you just sort of end up with that same problem where, okay, so, maybe someone can't work 80 hours a week because they have a family. And unfortunately, usually that falls to women to be the child, take care of the children and all that sort of stuff. I'm not saying that's everyone. That's just sort of an average. And so they can't do the 80 hours a week. I think it'd be great if people put a little bit more thought into when they measure that, like, as a per unit amount, not as like a total amount. Like, can we actually get someone who brings in a lot of money but only does 10 hours of work or 20 hours of work or something like that? I'd say just do it smartly if people do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are just about done with this show. And a couple of comments I had real quick. I think in my relatively unique position of having intersections of doing a lot of podcasts, monitoring the Archeo Field Techs group on Facebook, running booths at conferences, and, talking to CRM firms pretty much all the time in relation to WildNote and things like that. I would say more often than not, it's women who are in the positions of hiring these days. There's still a lot of old crusty men at the top of some of these places, but there's a lot of women who are project managers, principal investigators, and I would hope to think that the gender pay scale is getting more equal because of that, right? Because they're the gatekeepers now, which is a good thing. There's more diversity in doing that. I don't remember what my other comment was, and we're out of time anyway. So this has been a great discussion. Hopefully you guys keep this going. Please respond to this podcast wherever you see it. Leave us some comments, whether you agree with us or disagree with us. We're okay. We can take it. We're adults. And
I can't take it. I can't take it.
Andrew can't actually take it. Yeah. We'll send him to a grief counselor if you send him anything. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll be back in a couple weeks with another exciting topic. See you later. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archpodnet.com.
archpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at archpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about.
Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.
See you guys next time.
All right. Well, I think that was everybody. I don't hear anybody else say goodbye, so we'll go. Yeah. I'm probably just going to end it right now, although I hear his child.
Goodbye.
There we go.
Oh, no, it's not goodbye to you. It's not goodbye to you. No. Dad's saying goodbye to people on the podcast.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.